Can you believe that a pilot who couldn't sink a single ship in 72 missions changed the fate of an entire empire in just 1 second with impossible mathematics? Is a bomb skipping across the water like a flat stone to destroy a massive warship madness? Or is it the most extraordinary engineering miracle in the history of warfare? How could a ghost coming from 50 feet altitude, undetectable even by radar, single-handedly stop a massive convoy in the middle of the ocean that serves as a grave for thousands of soldiers? As the first rays of morning hit Port Moresby's wet runway, Major Ed Larner stood there. With his hands buried in his pockets, his gaze was somewhere far away. He was 31 years old, but his eyes seemed to have housed too many stories. He had flown 72 missions. 72 times he had returned from the brink of death. 72 times he had pushed his luck. What had he achieved after these 72 missions face to face with death? He had managed to sink 0 ships. A big fat 0. It was raining lightly. This was the kind of rain that could even change the course of war. 9 B-25 Mitchell bombers were lined up around the runway. Each had 8 machine guns in its nose. Each carried a 1,000-pound bomb in its belly. Each aircraft contained 5 men. Some of these 5 men were husbands, some were fathers, some were sons. They all knew they might not return home today. Lana watched them. All their faces were so young. Lieutenant Jake Fawcett was only 23 years old, born and raised in Memphis. His family were cotton farmers. Captain Bill Hayes from Boston was 32 years old. He was a father of 3 children. Lieutenant Tom Mitchell was 25 years old. He was waiting for the war to end to get married. Would the war give a positive answer to this expectation? No one knew yet. Major Lana thought about the meeting they had held in the tent the night before. He had gathered the squadron leaders, spread the map on the table. He had pressed his finger on the Bismarck Sea. He tried to explain in a weary tone, "Right here, there are 16 Japanese ships. 8 of them are transports, 8 are destroyers. They're all carrying 7,000 soldiers. If they reach Leh..." He couldn't complete his sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone remembered Buna. 6 months ago they had lost 5,000 men. They had walked over the corpses of American and Japanese soldiers who had lost their lives in the desolate and dark forest. The identity of death or the deceased person didn't matter. When the corpses started to rot, they all spread the same smell around. "You know high-altitude bombing," Lana had continued. "It has a 3% hit rate. That means only 3 out of every 100 bombs reach the target. The remaining 97 plow the bottom of the ocean. This mathematics isn't enough to get the men home, gentlemen." There had been a deep silence in the tent. "General Kenny suggested an idea," Lana had finally said. His voice had gradually lowered. "We're going to skip the bombs." "What?" Jake Fawcett had leaned forward. "How do you mean, like skipping stones?" "Exactly like that." "From 50 feet?" "From 50 feet." There had been a long silence. Then Bill Hayes, in that calm Boston accent, had asked, "Major, isn't this suicide?" Lana had looked at him. These were honest looks, looks with that understanding between 2 soldiers. "Yes, Bill," he had said, "it is. But every other alternative means allowing 7,000 Japanese soldiers to land. And that's also a kind of suicide, just the slower one." Now, on the runway, Lana remembered that moment with sadness. He recalled that none of them had objected to this suicide mission, that none had said no. Because all these soldiers knew very well that in life, one would have to choose between bad and worse. He looked at his watch. It showed 7:15. They would take off from the runway in 15 minutes. As he walked toward his plane, he saw his co-pilot Tom Benz in the cockpit. The young man was running through the checklist. He had a methodical, calm demeanor. Lana watched him for a moment. He thought about how normal he seemed to appear, as if they were going out on a routine training flight. As if 2 hours later, they wouldn't be on that razor-thin line between death and life. He climbed toward the cockpit. Benz looked at him. "Are you ready, Major?" he asked. Lana smiled. It was a tired smile. "No, Tom, but we're going anyway." He started the engines. That familiar roar echoed across the entire runway. The smell of burning fuel emanating from the vibrating metal enveloped everything. The other 8 aircraft around him began to become visible. They were like deadly, beautiful giant insects. Voices came over the radio. Each pilot was reporting their position. Their voices were quite calm and professional. But Lana could hear the fear beneath each voice, because he felt the same fear himself. At 7:45, he released the plane's brakes and began takeoff. The other aircraft followed Major Lana's plane one after another. On the way to the Bismarck Sea, Lana thought for a moment about his small but happiness-scented house in Nashville, Tennessee. His life flashed before his eyes. In the summer months, his mother would sit on the porch of the house covered with white fences, sipping her lemonade. His father would read his newspaper. They had an ordinary but beautiful life. Then war suddenly knocked on their door. It had entered everyone's life, changed everything. Now Nashville was very far away. It remained in another world, in another life. They were now 30 feet above the ground. The water beneath them was so close that the wave crests formed as they passed over sometimes hit the windshield wipers. Lana looked at the formation. There were 9 aircraft in total, 9 small dots gliding in this infinite blue. How fragile they looked, how defenseless they were. At 8:30, Benz announced, "Major, we're right on course." "Good job, Tom." "Major?" "Yes." This is going to work, right?" Lana looked at him. He was still a 24-year-old kid. He had grown up on the ocean coast in California. He had told him once. His eyes sparkled when he talked about loving to surf, about gliding over the waves. "I don't know, Tom," Lana said honestly, "but we'll try to make it work." At 8:52, they saw thick black smoke rising from 16 ships on the horizon. Lana activated his throat microphone. He clicked once into the microphone. It was a simple, sharp and clear click. 8 pilots responded simultaneously. Click, click, click. There was no turning back from this moment on. As the convoy approached, Lana counted the ships. 1, 2, 3. There were 8 transports in total. Each ship was filled with hundreds of enemy soldiers. Those soldiers, despite being enemies, were people with homes, loved ones, dreams and lives. For a moment, Lana thought that on any of the enemy ships there might be someone who missed Osaka or Tokyo the way he missed Nashville. Maybe he too was trying to remember a porch, a mother drinking lemonade. Suddenly he remembered the 5,000 men who died in 3 months at Buna. The memory of people lost in the forgotten forest, their corpses starting to rot, appeared in his mind. No, this wasn't the time for humanity. This was the time for survival. At 9 o'clock, the Australian Bew fighters dived. 13 aircraft swept the ship Convoy with cannon shells fired by brave men gliding in the air. As planned, Japanese air defense turned toward them. Then the B-17S came from high above. As the bombs fell one by one, the Japanese ships began to make chaotic maneuvers. Everything was going perfectly, exactly as they wanted. Lana cut the throttle. He descended to 40 feet. His heart was beating wildly in his chest. His hands were trembling, but he was holding the aircraft's controls tightly. "Walls, what's the distance?" he asked the bombardier. Walls replied, 4,000 yards, Major." The second transport ship had caught his eye. It was a 700-foot-long ship sitting calmly on the water. How many men were inside? 1,000? 1,500? The bombardier Walls called out over the headset, 3,800 yards. Lana took a deep breath. Could this be his last breath? Who could know? Distance, 3,600 yards, Major. The destroyer had seen them. Its guns turned toward them. The first shells began to come. The shells were going too high. They hadn't adjusted the firing altitude yet. Distance, 2,000 yards, sir. Lana began to open fire. 8 machine guns roared at once. The sound was deafening. The vibration shook the entire aircraft. Tracer rounds danced through the air as they advanced. The shells were hitting the upper section of the transport ship. Metal pieces began to fly. Windows shattered. Those on top of the ship were falling into the sea. 1,200 yards. Lana spread the aircraft's wings wide. All the bombers in the formation locked onto their targets. 9 aircraft against 9 ships, synchronized with each other simultaneously. 800 yards. The destroyer began firing again. This time the shells were passing very close. A few pieces of shrapnel hit the aircraft's fuselage. Benz reported the damage, but the engine was still running. 600 yards. The transport ship was now filling all the space in front of the aircraft. A giant wall of steel and fire was in front of the aircraft. Lana's inner voice was screaming, "Pull up, escape, save yourself." But Lana maintained his course, 400 yards. Now he could see the men on the ship's deck, their faces and the fear forming on their faces. They were all running and screaming in one direction. Lana would do the same if he were in their place. 300 yards. Bomb ready, Commander. Lana pressed the button. At that moment, he felt time stop. He felt the bomb drop and the aircraft lighten. He saw the bomb dive toward the water from the nose section. He saw with his own eyes it bounce once on the water, and as soon as it entered the water, it went straight toward the target like an arrow. He pulled the stick hard toward himself. He climbed toward the blue sky. Then he heard the explosion. The shockwave shook the aircraft. Lana looked back. The transport ship was splitting. It was literally splitting in two. A giant metal monster was dying. Fire, smoke, screams were visible and audible from every direction. Dozens, hundreds of men were jumping into the sea. With one bomb in 15 seconds, a huge ship had disappeared. 2 more explosions were heard simultaneously. Jake Fawcett had hit another ship. Bill Hayes had hit a destroyer. Both ships had split in 2. Their rear sections were also underwater. 3 targets had been destroyed in 90 seconds. Everyone was experiencing happiness and pride simultaneously. But not long after this joy, Tom Mitchell's plane was hit. Lana clearly saw the moment Mitchell's plane was hit from inside his own aircraft. Destroyer shells instantly destroyed Mitchell's B-25 with a direct hit. The echo of the explosion, the flames engulfing the sky, the metal fuselage of the aircraft plunging into the water. Everything happened so fast that 5 men disappeared in a few seconds. Lana's throat knotted. But there was no time to cry, get angry or mourn. War continued with all its ruthlessness. Carl Johnson attacked the main transport ship. He had approached the ship with a perfect descent of the kind that would be featured in textbooks. The bomb he sent tore the ship's bridge. Explosions began in succession. Ammunition depots, fuel barrels, everything was exploding. The ship had turned into hell. Paul Warren's plane was also hit, but he managed to drop his bomb. His plane was burning in flames, but he was trying to keep the aircraft in the air. It was an incredible sight. This was what human will was like. Death was calling him, but Warren was saying, "No, not yet. I have one more mission." In 4 minutes, 6 transport ships had sunk. 2 destroyers had been heavily damaged. They had lost 1 B-25. Then the second attack wave came. Major Ralph Chelly brought 9 more aircraft. They too went on the attack. Diving into the bleeding air, they gave their all. Harold Jensen was also hit. His plane crashed into the water. He couldn't even open his parachute. It just sank. In 8 minutes, 7 transport ships had been sunk. 3 destroyers had also been destroyed. Soon 18 Mitsubishi A6M. Japanese fighter planes suddenly appeared in the sky. These planes were also known as Zeros. With Silver Hawk wings, they were gliding down from the clouds, spewing rage and death. Lana's ammunition was running out. The plane's fuel was decreasing. He was exhausted. As one of the Zeros descended lower and lower to hunt him, Lana also descended. He went down to the wave crest. He was only 15 feet from the surface. The aircraft's propellers were hitting the water. He was about to crash onto the water, but managed to escape. Lana was both too fast and too determined to escape. Paul Warren wasn't lucky about escaping. He couldn't escape a Zero with his damaged aircraft. The Japanese pilot was patient. He waited for the right moment and then started firing. As a result of the opened fire, Warren's aircraft engine exploded. The plane had to go into a dive. Lana had seen 3 parachutes in the sky. 3 men were saved, he thought, but 2 men were lost. In war, small victories were as important as great victories. When the Zeros retreated, Lana conducted damage assessment. The port engine was in terrible condition. The engine was leaking oil. Fuel was at 60% level. Port Moresby was 90 minutes away. He looked back one last time. The massive ship Convoy was now gone. On the water, there were only burning metal pieces, sinking ships, and hundreds of men trying to stay alive by swimming. 7,000 men had set out from Rabaul. Of these, only 1,200 would reach their destination. 5,800 men would die, some by drowning, some by burning. Some would await death's cold face due to hunger, some due to thirst. Lana didn't want to think about any of this, but he couldn't prevent such thoughts from appearing in his mind either. Because humans were such beings. Even in war they were human. Even if they killed, they suffered. Even if they won, they lost something. Tom Benz sat silently beside him. The young man hadn't spoken at all for the last hour. He had just done his duty by piloting. "Tom," Lana called out. "Yes, Major?" "Today? You did good work today." Benz looked at him. There were tears in his eyes. "Major Mitchell? I know. He was my friend. I know, Tom. He was going to get married. I know." There was a long silence. "Is it worth it, Major?" Benz finally asked. "Is it worth all this?" Lana couldn't find an answer, because he didn't know. He really didn't know. The port engine was almost stopping at 10:10. The engine's oil had completely run out. Terrible sounds began to come from the engine. Lana stopped the engine by stabilizing it so the propeller wouldn't catch air. Now, with a single engine just above stall speed, they were flying very slowly. When they saw land, Benz breathed. "New Guinea," he shouted. "There's still 30 miles. But we'll make it, Major. We'll make it," he added. They barely made it. The starboard engine was red from the heat generated. It could explode at any moment. But it managed to hold on for the last 30 miles. When they landed on the runway at 11:17, hundreds of people were waiting for them. Technicians, doctors, officers, everyone was applauding. Lana shut down the aircraft's engines. His entire body, including his hands, was trembling. Benz looked at him. "Major?" he asked with a worried manner. "Just a minute, Tom. Just give me a minute," he could respond. He sat silently in the cockpit, and for the first time he began to cry. He had given his first reaction to all this chaos that had happened. He began to cry for Tom Mitchell, Harold Jensen, Paul Warren's two lost men, for all of them. After a long time, when his crying was over, he wiped his tears. He took a deep breath and got off the plane. His debriefing lasted 2 hours. He had to struggle with a barrage of questions asked in succession. How many ships were there? What types of ships were they? How much damage had they inflicted? What were their own losses? No matter how many questions were asked, Lana answered them all in a calm tone, with a professional manner. But inside he had a huge emptiness. He felt nothing. When the reconnaissance photos came, they saw the truth. 7 transport ships had sunk. The 8th was burning on the shore. 4 destroyers had been destroyed. They had gotten rid of 12 out of 16 ships. When General Kenny came that evening, he looked at the photos. Shaking his head sideways, he said, "Sink the 8th ship too." That night, 9 more aircraft took off. Lana didn't fly. He couldn't fly either. His plane had no engine. At least that was his excuse. The truth was that he didn't want to fly anymore. He didn't want to see more death. But he went to the runway and watched the aircraft taking off. As the 9 aircraft rose toward the setting sun, he prayed silently. He didn't pray to God, because he no longer believed in God. But even with the emptiness he felt inside, he still prayed. Maybe it was out of habit. Maybe it was out of desperation. When the planes returned, the 8th ship had also been sunk. In the following days, Lana spent his time reading reports. He read how PT boats shot at life rafts, how bombers strafed swimming soldiers. As he read all this news, he vomited. Behind his tent, he vomited without anyone seeing. War has one rule: you only fight the enemy. But you can't kill those who surrender, those who are helpless. But the rules had changed. The Japanese had strafed American pilots after they parachuted. The Americans had responded in kind. The cycle of hatred and anger continued with relentless fervor. Lana signed the reports. He didn't ask questions about what was written in the report, didn't want to hear the details. Sometimes not knowing was better. Current numbers about casualties in the battle came on March 7th. The final situation was as follows. Japanese losses: 8 transport ships, 4 destroyers, 6,500 dead. American losses: 4 B-25s, 13 men. The mathematics were clear. Victory was certain. But Lana didn't feel this as victory. He only felt it as fatigue and a bitter end. Kenny congratulated Lana. It was the most decisive battle of the Pacific War. "You made history, Ed," he commended. Lana smiled with a tired, meaningless smile. "Making history? History doesn't care about dead children, General," he responded. Kenny looked at him for a long time. Then he put his hand on his shoulder. "I know, son, I know." He briefly closed the subject. Lana flew 16 more missions. He trained a total of 62 new pilots, teaching them skip bombing. 18 of these pilots lost their lives. 23 were wounded. Each of them died again every night in Lana's dreams. In May 1943, he requested a transfer to switch from using combat aircraft to using transport aircraft. No one objected to Lana's request. Everyone accepted it with understanding. Some men could fight forever, but some could only endure this war to a limit. Lana had also reached his limit mentally and psychologically. The war finally ended in 1945. Japan had surrendered. Lana had finally reunited with Nashville, which he missed so much, with the small house with white fences. His mother was still drinking lemonade on the porch. His father was still reading his newspaper. Nothing had changed. Actually, everything had changed. Lana never talked about the war. His family asked questions several times. What did you do there? How was it? Were you scared? But Lana gave the same answer each time. I just did my duty. Eventually, they stopped asking questions. Years passed after the war. Lana got married and had children. He lived a normal, ordinary life. But every March 2nd, he would silently raise a glass. For Tom Mitchell, Harold Jensen, Paul Warren's two men, and for the thousands of men on those Japanese ships who lost their lives. When Lana died in 1997, his obituary contained one sentence about the war. Served in World War II. The obituary never mentioned the Bismarck Sea, skip bombing, or the 8 ships sunk. Because Lana never wanted to be a hero, he only desired to survive and return to his much-missed home. He always wanted to forget what was experienced in the war. But we must remember Tom Mitchell, 25 years old, never married, never had children. One March morning, suddenly, he was buried in the ocean waters. We must remember Harold Jensen. He lost his life while trying to make the second attack pass. Because the first wasn't enough for him to complete his mission, he wanted to succeed with the second and return home. We must remember Paul Warren's two men. Even their names were lost in the records. But they were there too. They fought too. They died too. And yes, we must remember Ed Lana. Because he didn't just fight, he managed to survive, and surviving is sometimes harder than fighting. Because survivors are cursed with the curse of remembering. Because survivors see the dead in their dreams. Survivors carry the feeling of guilt. Why me? Why not them? Today, no museum displays B-25s. After the war ended, they were all scrapped. They were broken down into metal pieces. Maybe they were turned into cars, maybe into dishwashers. But the spirit still lives. It lives in the spirit of the pilot who did his duty despite all his fears. It lives in the spirit of the person who maintained his course in the face of every difficulty. It lives in the depths of the heart that seeks hope in every darkness. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea remained a small note in history books. It didn't become as famous as Midway. It didn't have a story as well known as Guadalcanal. But on that bloody March morning, 9 aircraft changed the course of history. 9 aircraft turned the tide of war. 9 aircraft proved the motto that sometimes the difference between madness and courage is only the result. So what happened to Tom Benz, that young co-pilot? He survived the war. He went to California, started surfing again. He got married, had children. But every year, on March 2nd, he would go to the ocean, sit on the beach for hours, silently watching the waves. And he would remember that morning with deep sighs. Lana's trembling hands, the moment of Mitchell's explosion, everything he remembered with old eyes. Benz gave his only interview in 2015, at the age of 92, to a local newspaper. "Weren't you afraid?" asked the young journalist. Benz smiled with a raspy old laugh. "Son," he said, "that day my lungs almost burst from fear, but we did what we had to do." So do you remember Major Lana? Benz's eyes filled with tears. I remember him every day. He was both a good person and a good leader. He took us to hell and brought most of us back from there, if not all. For a moment, catching an empty moment, the young journalist asked, "Was Major Lana a hero?" There was a long silence in the room. No, Benz finally answered. He wasn't a hero. Because heroes don't suffer, but Lana suffered every day. He had to suffer until the end of his life. This makes him more valuable than a hero. This makes him human. And we have come to the end of our story. The silent heroes of the Bismarck Sea were not supermen. They were not immortal or fearless. They too were afraid like every human being. They flew trembling and returned crying. But they did what they had to do. That's what makes them heroes. Makes them worth remembering. That's exactly why we must never forget them. Tom Mitchell, Harold Jensen, Paul Warren's nameless men, and all the others who lost their lives. They fought so we wouldn't fight. They died so we could live. They sacrificed their lives in pain so we could forget the pain. Finally, if this story deeply affected you as it did us, please press the like button. Every like tells YouTube to show this story to more people. Remember to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Every week we try to present you with forgotten stories from dusty archives. If you have someone serving in your family, please write to us in the comments. You too are ambassadors of peace to reach our community to the whole world. You are part of keeping these memories alive. We offer you our endless gratitude. Stay well.